Joining me from our Sydney studios is Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rozner. And also in Sydney is writer, commentator and farmer, Alexandra Marshall. Hello, gang.
Hey, Rita.
Now, Alexandra, the UK election has been a triumph for Boris Johnson and his Brexit strategy. What do you make of the result, and do you see any parallels with the Australian election?
Well, first of all, Boris Johnson, he's very lucky that love actually appears to have worked for him. He had a very good advertising campaign, and well done. He managed to win the election that we all feared he might lose. As I said on December the 5th, I think it was, this is basically a rerun of our election, where it's sort of the two, not exactly your best choice of candidate, but people have come out in droves to vote away Jeremy Corbyn. So I was referring to it as the stranger danger election, where we had socialism creeping in as the sort of giving sweets to children in car parks kind of thing. And so we were very, very lucky that the UK have escaped Jeremy Corbyn's, stranger danger election, like we were escaping ours.
Yes, Gideon, Labor's hard left ideology was electoral poison in the end, but we've got to acknowledge around 1 in 3 Brits still voted for what would have been a socialist government with a deep anti-Semitism problem. That to me is still disturbing, that 1 in 3 Brits overlooked that and said we're still picking Labor.
Oh, look, Rita, every silver cloud has a dark lining. I mean, let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good here. I mean, look, I don't think I've ever been as excited to come on this network as I have been today. Throughout this whole 3-year Brexit process, ever since 2016, the Remainers, who have done everything in their power to obstruct, delay and defeat the will of the people, have always called for a people's vote. Today, they got one, and it emphatically backed not only Brexit, but the principle of the fact that the resentment against that very political class that has tried to frustrate the will of the people. But on the Jeremy Corbyn manifesto, this was the most disastrously socialist policy platform I think put anywhere ever in my lifetime, and it proved to be electoral poison. The many, not the few, rejected it, knowing that it would be a disaster for the country, and this bodes well for my theory, which is I think the time of wokeness, of political correctness, of socialism being back in vogue, that is ending. I think the 2010s will be looked at as a very, very bad decade for all those reasons, but we're about to enter the roaring 20s where freedom will make a comeback.
Oh, well, you are very, very up and about today.
Always.
I'm not sure if I agree with that entirely.
Me neither.
Only because you look at the vote of the millennial group, and yes, their worldview may change as they get older.
Or as they get tax returns.
As they enter the real world and mummy and daddy aren't paying for everything. But as it stands, they love these socialist policies. They love to have free everything and, we'll just tax the rich a bit more.
Rita, that's an important point. I'll chime in just for a second, and you do raise a point. Like, I'll be the first to admit, as a millennial myself, that my generation is probably the worst in memory. Millennials are entitled, spoiled, selfish, lazy, and especially, yes, they are left-leaning. But if you look at the generation below mine, sorry as well, Ellie.
Just write our whole generation off.
Correct. Well, I am writing our whole generation off, but the good news is that if you look at Generation Z, the generation below mine and Ellie's, the generation below from 1995 onwards, they are increasingly conservative, they are increasingly ambitious, they are increasingly hard-working, and they increasingly value freedom and the free market. So, look, the pendulum is swinging back, and there is hope in the generation coming after mine.
All right, well, that's an argument for another day. Now, I mentioned the anti-Semitism problems within Labor, and they are deep, and Jeremy Corbyn just refused to apologise and really acknowledge that the issue existed. I want to just bring you a little bit from this remarkable piece written by Frank Ferrodi in Spiked, where it was called the Labor Party's Problem with Jews. And it was all about how hatred for Israel and identity politics has given rise to a nasty new strain of anti-Semitism. Now, Ferredi wrote, I knew that hating Israel had become almost a defining viewpoint amongst those who call themselves leftists. However, hatred for Israel does not have to involve hatred for Jews. At least, that's what I thought. This year, however, it has become clear to me that the old distinction between two forms of hatred, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, has virtually been erased, certainly among those who class themselves as political activists. It now seems that a significant constituency of people who attack Zionism do so not because they're particularly worried about Israel, but because they dislike Jews. I've got to say, Alexandra, this is something that worries me greatly, because this isn't a problem that is confined to just the UK. The left's anti-Semitism problems are growing in a lot of places around the world.
Well, you'd think that the world would learn this lesson after the wars that we've had, but my own father's family, we were Polish Jews and we fled to Australia a very long time ago. I've still got the nose, that's why I'm so pale. But it's still going on. I mean, how many times do we have to go through this before we stop hating each other and the left learn, not to have such racist policies and particularly anti-religious policies against the Jewish people? It's insanity. And I'm surprised to see it still being debated in these elections in our modern time. I'm sure the electorate was as well.
Absolutely. Now let's check in with Sex Pistols legend Johnny Rotten, who had a message for Jeremy Corbyn and the Labor Party.
For Corbyn and his Labour Party, you prejudiced racist I am Jew!
Whoa.
Oy
We
vey.
had to edit out a little bit, but where he screamed, Gideon, there, I am Jew, I tell you, that sent chills down my spine. This is so important to the Jewish people, this election. There were people who were vowing to leave the country if a Corbyn government was going to be formed. That's how fearful they were of the issues that Labor has with anti-Semitism, and seeing someone like Jeremy Corbyn become Prime Minister was just more than many of those Jews could bear.
Yeah, but I'm optimistic about that too, Rita, because Jeremy Corbyn lost quite severely. And Corbyn's anti-Semitism was actually a big issue and a big drag on his vote in this campaign. It confirms what I suspect of British people, what I know of Australian people, in that in the main, British people are clearly not anti-Semitic. They're clearly concerned about the shocking levels of anti-Semitism in Corbyn's Labor Party, and also it exposes the big problem with leftist racial sensibilities. I mean, these are people who fly off the handle if you use the wrong pronouns, yet they are perfectly happy to say all sorts of terrible things about Jews, because left-wing anti-racism in this day and age is not about decency, it's not about tolerance, it's not about being a good person, it's not about seeing the content of somebody's character rather than colour of their skin. It is about victimhood, and for various reasons, Jewish people in the main do not fit into the left's conception of the victimhood hierarchy. But look, as I said, the key thing here is that the British people were under no circumstances going to elect an anti-Semitic Prime Minister, and I think that is a very, very good sign.